Welcome back to another explainer. Okay, today we are wading straight into the deep end of digital political commentary. Look, if you spend any time online, you already know how fast a news cycle can just mutate, right? It turns into this chaotic, hyper-polarized web of claims, theories, counter-theories, the whole shebang. So what we're doing today is taking a really critical, objective look at one specific, rapid-fire piece of online commentary that pretty much perfectly captures this modern media ecosystem. We're putting on our neutral observer hats, and we're going to break down this complex, honestly pretty fiery narrative to see exactly how these arguments are built and what they tell us about the totally fractured state of digital info right now. All right, let's dive into this. We're going to neatly organize this rapid-fire narrative into 4 distinct buckets. First up, Trump's Middle East strategy. Then, regional conflict and escalation. Third, gangs and biolab claims. And finally, conservative media infighting.
So starting things off with Section 1, Trump's Middle East strategy.
The source we're looking at actually anchors its entire analysis of U.S. foreign policy on this specific super aggressive quote from Donald Trump, "Bomb the shit out of them." Now, while official statements might point to a newly negotiated peace deal with Iran meant to stop nuclear proliferation, the commentator we're analyzing flat-out rejects that surface-level narrative. They argue this quote right here reveals the true underlying strategy. In their view, the diplomatic terms are basically just a facade. It's a temporary maneuver hiding a much harsher, much more definitive military reality that's just waiting in the wings.
And this brilliantly illustrates the commentator's theory of this hidden, multi-step war book plan. The theory goes like this. Step 1, just sign the deal. Placate international pressure, open up the trade routes. Step 2, use those newly established boundaries to isolate and weaken the Iranian regime even further, basically taking advantage of previous military strikes that degraded their capabilities. And then Step 3, the ultimate goal, is capitalizing on internal unrest and infighting to trigger an actual overthrow of the government from the inside. So they don't see the peace deal as a resolution at all, it's just a tactical pause.
Now, what's particularly fascinating here is the internal ideological conflict the source highlights. The commentator openly goes after prominent conservative figure J.D. Vance. Vance is cited as arguing that historically all major conflicts, like World War I and World War II, they end with some kind of negotiation. Well, the commentator sharply rebukes this, pointing to a community note stating that World War II actually ended in unconditional surrender, not negotiation. So the source fundamentally rejects the whole doctrine of negotiation, demanding total surrender instead. It highlights a real fracture even among people who generally support the exact same political ticket. It's actually a great reminder for us that political factions are rarely monoliths.
Moving right along to Section 2, regional conflict and escalation.
Let's look at how this rhetoric translates into kinetic, real-world action. To isolate the facts from the heavy rhetoric, the source tracks a very specific timeline of escalation. Over the weekend, Hezbollah initiates rocket fire into northern Israel. Then, overnight, the Israeli Defense Forces notify U.S. Central Command of an impending response. And by morning, the IDF strikes a Hezbollah command center in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. The commentator uses this exact timeline to justify the kinetic military response, arguing, essentially, that no nation should tolerate cross-border attacks without overwhelming retaliation.
From there, the source pivots to a really fascinating claim about psychological operations. The commentator highlights an interview where former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar actually invokes the murder of George Floyd while speaking to a Western journalist. Now, the source argues this is not a genuine expression of solidarity. Instead, they claim it's a highly calculated psychological operation. The argument is that Hamas leadership actively uses American left-wing talking points, specifically around systemic racism, to manipulate Western audiences and drum up sympathy from very specific political demographics inside the U.S.
To push back even further against narratives sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, the source presents what they call the Palestine grift. They use historical mapping to argue against the whole concept of an occupied indigenous population. The commentator basically traces control of the region through various empires over time, from the Ottomans to the British and currently the Israelis. By framing the history purely as a sequence of shifting imperial and state control, the source is attempting to fundamentally delegitimize the contemporary political arguments surrounding Palestinian liberation.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. Section 3, gangs and biolab claims.
Really demonstrating the rapid-fire, almost chaotic nature of this commentary, the source suddenly jumps straight to a U.S. military kinetic strike in Venezuela. This strike eliminated the leader of the Tren de Aragua gang, Nino Guerrero. The commentator enthusiastically praises this action, framing it as a totally necessary defense of the American homeland against foreign criminal elements that have allegedly crossed the southern border. It really goes to show how quickly this kind of commentary can connect varied, global military actions right back to domestic American anxieties.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is the massive scale of it. The source leaps from gang strikes to these sweeping global intelligence conspiracies, specifically focusing on claims brought forward by Tulsi Gabbard regarding U.S.-funded biological laboratories. And the scale they're presenting is just staggering, over 120 alleged biolabs. Let's actually walk through the specific claims the source is amplifying here. According to the commentator, citing Gabbard, the U.S. government has funded these 120-plus biolabs spread across 30 different countries. And notably, they claim this includes active conflict zones like Ukraine. The allegations suggest that these labs are out there engaging in dangerous gain-of-function research with hazardous pathogens. But wait, it gets bigger. The source claims all of this has been subjected to a massive intelligence community cover-up that is only just now being exposed. This exposure supposedly prompted an executive order from Donald Trump to end all federal funding for this kind of research globally. The source presents all of this as absolute, total vindication for long-standing internet theories.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 4, Conservative Media Infighting.
So the crucial point here is how the source highlights a direct, pretty bitter clash between two conservative heavyweights. This is all about the narrative control surrounding the attempted assassination of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. On one side of the ring, you have Tucker Carlson claiming that Trump actively shut down the investigation, which obviously implies some deeper conspiracy. But then, on the other side, you have Dan Bongino vehemently denying this. Bongino states Trump was actually completely satisfied with the official narrative that the shooter acted alone. The commentator uses this internal civil war to directly attack Carlson's credibility.
And to twist the knife just a little bit further, the commentator points out this really deep structural irony. The Daily Caller, which, if you didn't know, is a major conservative news publication originally founded by Tucker Carlson himself, well, they actually published an article confirming Bongino's version of events. They reported that Trump was very satisfied with the official narrative. The source uses this to paint a picture of a media figure who is just completely detached from the reality being reported by his own journalistic creation. Basically, they are framing Carlson's claims as deliberate misinformation.
But then, the source delivers its most surprising twist yet. To explain why Carlson is diverging so hard from the rest of the conservative media ecosystem, the commentator brings in a quote from a Qatari political leader. This leader publicly accuses Tucker Carlson of operating essentially as a foreign propaganda machine driven by financial interests tied to Qatar. I mean, the commentator just marvels at the sheer absurdity of the situation. They point out that this massive accusation of foreign financial influence is coming directly from the exact nation allegedly providing the influence. It's wild.
So, we have covered a lot today. Geopolitical theories, kinetic warfare, sweeping conspiracy allegations, and some really bitter media infighting. All of it derived from just one single stream of internet commentary. It's like a giant puzzle, and it really forces us to ask a critical question. In an era of such intense, fractured digital media, how do we actually verify information when literally every single event is immediately spun into competing, highly charged realities? It's a huge challenge. It requires us to stay objective, to critically evaluate where we get our news, and to always try to look past the rhetoric to find the underlying facts. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and stay curious about what you see online.